How yoga has perhaps saved your life, but definitely significantly improved your quality of life.
I was diagnosed with the condition multiple sclerosis, and that was in 1996. Am I dying? I didn't know if I was dying, if this was terminal. So I got back to the hospital as soon as I can. I was met by a team of 4 doctors when I arrived back at UCLA.
That's not very encouraging.
And I was like, okay, this is serious. I'm still young enough. How do I maintain my health? So what he suggested, which I thought was very astute back in 1996, he said, why don't you try some yoga? My feeling was that to help mitigate the stress levels that I may have been enduring. And I was like, okay, weird. So I ended up going to the institute, the Iyengar Yoga Institute in Los Angeles, the following Tuesday. Stumbled in literally with the help of a friend. I was welcomed into the class, and my teacher said, okay, there's no guarantee with this, which I thought was very honest, because there's no cure for what MS is. But if there's a way to get my functionality back, feeling back in my body, if I can get this thing into remission and keep it in remission, that would be great. We started doing MRIs. So when we compared 2005 to 2001, with no intervention of medication, the lesions on my brain had reduced in number and size.
It not only did not get worse, it actually even improved.
Improved. When I met Mr. Iyengar, one of the things that he said to me, which he says not just to me but to others, every day you must walk that fine line between courage and caution. To be brave enough, to be courageous, to move forward, but cautious enough to respect what's going on in the body. What guru, my understanding, translates as, is the one who brings you from darkness into light. You know, when I started, I think, which was helpful, it was a nice portal, was when I started to face my fears in an asana class. Teachers asked me to do this, to do something that I never thought I could do, a physical activity. And once, if you can face that fear in a very studied and safe environment and overcome the fear, then I think that's another portal, another gateway into how can I translate that into something more tangible in my day-to-day life off the yoga mat.
Hi, and welcome to the next edition of Beyond the Bubble. It's really a pleasure to have here someone who is perhaps our guest who's coming from the most furthest afield, though we had someone from Australia, but he is a runner-up in that because he's Garth from Los Angeles. And, well, I'll let him present it. How yoga has perhaps saved your life, but definitely significantly improved your quality of life. And that is something we're going to discuss at length, and also what brings you to Brussels.
Sure.
And if you like the show and you enjoy it and you think your friends would enjoy it, please like it, please subscribe to it, and please share it with anyone who would enjoy these conversations. We would very much appreciate that. And comments, suggestions, guest ideas are more than welcome. So a warm welcome, Garth. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, so with that little teaser and introduction, please tell us a little bit about yourself and especially how you landed in Brussels.
I landed in Brussels at the kind invitation of my friend Shai Kaplan, who has put together a yoga endeavor to work with persons who may look towards rehabilitating their health and improving their quality of life through the application of yoga in clinical hospital settings in order to, again, work as part of a multidisciplinary team to enhance people's quality of life who may be in a situation where they need some sort of healing, for lack of a better word, healing and rehabilitation.
I think there's a lot to discover there because so you are temporary in Brussels, or at least one of your perhaps many visits, but you're not based here. You are citizen of the world or citizen of Los Angeles?
Well, I am a citizen, you might say, of the world, I guess, though I live in Los Angeles. I've lived there since 1990. And what prompted me, or perhaps a little backstory of how I, landed here is I discovered Iyengar yoga as part of my own personal healing trajectory.
And when you say healing, it would be very interesting for our listeners and viewers to hear more about your story. So you were diagnosed with a very serious condition about a decade ago.
A little bit more than that, almost 3 decades ago. So I was diagnosed with the condition multiple sclerosis, and that was in 1996. So it'll be 30 years since my diagnosis. It will be May 23rd as the day I was diagnosed, 1996. I was pursuing an acting career. Initially, that's what had taken me to Los Angeles, doing what I thought was, I suppose, healthy, trying to be fit and what have you. And I had essentially started to lose feeling in my body. It had come on quite, I wouldn't say overnight, but I started to lose feeling in my right arm, where it feels like you're numb and tingling, like when your arm falls asleep. Then this had traveled to the left side of my body, down into my legs, and started to, take over my entire embodiment. And so I started going numb and tingling from the feet, then all the way up through my face and skull. So this had been going on over the course of about a month. At the time, I was producing a play in Hollywood, still pursuing my acting career, and had come off of a very high-stress production job prior to that.
So it was acting or production mostly?
But while I started as an actor, then I was working in production as well, and then I'd let that go because I felt that wasn't really what the course that I wanted to continue to pursue in my career. And so then I went back to more of an acting life, and opportunities present themselves, and I'd had some experience with production, and so I was producing a play just for the sake of being involved in the community and with the theater at that point, and exploring those creative endeavors. Excuse me. And that's when things, and I was going to the gym and all the time. I was, doing a martial art, and this is when this started to come on. And I thought, what's going on? And we got home from the gym one day, I couldn't feel my feet. It went away within a couple of days, and I was like, okay. And then as I continued, I was working out, trying to be as fit as I could be, and things continued to get a little bit worse, and then over time, to be honest, I was afraid to find out what was really going on. Something serious is going on here. I don't know what it is, because there was no one event that I would say that triggered this, that I know of, that I could identify. And so as things got progressively in a state of decline, you might say, that's when I eventually, I really need to find out what's happening here.
So you wouldn't even go to the doctor at first?
I went to the doctor, and they didn't really have anything. At first I went to a chiropractor because I thought maybe it's a pinched nerve, from doing the martial arts, lifting weights, doing all that. And it didn't really relieve it. In fact, things made things a little bit worse. So I said, okay, that's kind of weird. Then I went to a doctor, and they didn't really do a lot of tests at that point, and maybe I didn't go to the most extreme doctor that I could have, and then I was a little bit afraid to find out what's happening. A little bit of that denial, I suppose, as a young man in my 30s. And so when it had taken over my head, face, and skull, I'd literally got numb from head to toe. I thought something serious is going on, something very serious. So I contacted, it was UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, and they had what I understood was a fairly good neurology department. So I contacted the neurology department directly. I didn't go through another series of doctor recommendations. I was lucky enough to get in to see a doctor the next day. They had a cancellation because initially it was like 6 to 8 weeks before you see somebody. My reaction, having worked in Hollywood, is like, okay, well, I could be dead in 6 to 8 weeks, the way this has, been coming on. And now I'm
The
numb.
drama was also
Yeah, of course. There's a little bit of
affecting
drama, but at the same time, it's like, okay, I knew from working in production that there's always a way you can figure something out. So I asked the doctor's nurse if there's any way I could see him. And luckily, I got in to see the doctor the next day, I was very blessed for that. Immediately, he ran some tests, did an MRI, magnetic resonance imaging of the brain, of the spine initially was his initial thought based on the symptoms that I was presenting. And then it was very dramatic Hollywood, I guess. I go home for lunch and the phone rings and it's the doctor. He's like, I want you back in the hospital as soon as possible. And I don't want you out there on the street. And I was like, okay, well, this is like a bad TV movie sort of.
Yeah, it doesn't have a good ring to it.
Exactly. So I said, okay, well, doc, you got to give me something. I mean, you want me back in the hospital? I've got an audition today. I'm still trying to get to my auditions.
I got my life.
I got my life to continue to carry on with. And he said, well, I want to see you get on a lot more and continue to live your life. But I don't want you out there driving. I don't want you out there in the world at this point. Let's get you into the hospital and find out what's really going on with you.
Were you familiar with MR?
I'd never had one before.
Sorry, MS.
With MS. So I didn't know what it was at that point. A lot of times when we don't know what's happening and we start to look on the internet or read books, it's like, okay, my imagination went a little bit wild as an actor, I suppose. And it's like, this could be, I had no idea. Maybe it's a tumor. Maybe it's a cancer. Am I dying? I didn't know if I was dying, if this was terminal. So I got back to the hospital as soon as I can. I was met by a team of 4 doctors when I arrived back at UCLA.
That's not very encouraging.
And I was like, okay, this is serious. And I was on the ward where there were a lot of people with serious medical conditions just by stopping and looking around. It was the neurology ward. And they did another MRI that afternoon of my spine. The next morning, did spinal tap, ran all these tests, which was freaking me out, of course. Suddenly I'm like really facing my own mortality. And that sounds maybe dramatic, but it was the reality. It was like, am I dying? Am I ever going to get out of this hospital? I don't. And if I do, what's life going to be like on the other side of it? And the next day, we did another MRI of my brain. And so within months, he got the results from that. And it was May 23rd. Like, I just didn't remember the day when, something life-changing can happen in your life. You kind of remember that. And the doctor was actually quite excited to let me know that he was pretty sure it was a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, MS. And so I was like, okay, well, that's kind of a relief.
Because at least you know.
Yeah, I know what it is that I'm dealing with. I'm not going to die, at least not yet, so that will hopefully give me some time to think about what I should do. So naturally.
So that was kind of chapter 1.
Chapter 1, exactly. That was my introduction to
kind of setting the scene and saying
of a new life. So for me, before I knew what it was or even going to that discovery, myself was like, okay, well, what do I do, doc? I mean, I'm glad it's not something that's going to be, terminal. And what should I do for my life? I mean, I've been going to the gym. I've been doing Aikido. I've been doing martial arts. I'm pursuing an acting career, whatever. So what he suggested for aside from the allopathic medicines for that intervention to see if I was responding well to the medication, which was MS is basically thought to be an autoimmune condition where the immune system attacks the protective coating on the nerves or the myelin sheath. So what happens is it leaves scarring on the nerves, so the messages don't get through from the brain to the various parts of the body. That's basically it in a nutshell. Most people are diagnosed, as I was, with relapsing and remitting, which means you can get it into remission, and so hopefully, and carry on.
So you can kind of be dormant.
Exactly, and so the approach from my understanding, from the clinical point of view, the doctor's point of view, is there were some drugs that were new on the market, some medications that to reduce any inflammation. It's also thought to be inflammatory. So I was responding well to those medications. I was on a protocol of intravenous anti-inflammatories, steroids. I was responding well from what the doctors could see. I was still couldn't feel my body, but I was feeling better. I wasn't feeling horrible. And I said, so I don't want to embark necessarily on a life of medication, but what else can I do in my life for my physical discipline? At this point, I'm still young enough. I was in my mid-30s.
Career, or at least.
Exactly. How do I maintain my health? So what he suggested, which I thought was very astute back in 1996, he said, why don't you try some yoga? Which I think I can't read his mind, but my feeling was that to help mitigate the stress levels that I may have been enduring, having been working the pressures of career and trying to get things done. I was in the midst of producing this play still, and I was in the hospital now, and I was like, okay, weird.
Did you consider that a strange suggestion? Or?
Well, I was like, okay, weird. And also he suggested swimming, so to keep the body cool.
Right. Swimming makes sense.
Yeah. So
right?
Yoga and swimming, I said, okay, well, that sounds like a reasonable discipline that I can try, at least give it a go. And luckily, friends who were visiting me in the hospital that evening, when I share with them what the doctor said, this diagnosis, what are you going to do? It's like, I don't know what I'm going to do in the whole general scope of things, but what he suggested was these protocols, these disciplines. And so they suggested I try Iyengar yoga, and that's the style of yoga that I teach.
How do you spell that?
Iyengar. And Mr. Iyengar has been a teacher of mine, also of Shai Kaplan's, and that's how I met Shai initially many years ago in India, Pune, India.
Hang on a second. So you're in the hospital, having been diagnosed, started allopathic treatment with drugs essentially, which somewhat improve your condition, but then you get this idea from the doctor, suggestion from the doctor. There's this thing called yoga. I mean, of course, you certainly were aware of yoga, but probably didn't look at it in a way that this could have such positive impact on your condition.
Correct.
As you
at that
most
point.
certainly learned later on. But at that point, you just said, okay, that sounds like
let's see,
an interesting idea, I guess.
And I think I had been working, practicing martial arts. So I had a sense. I'd been to Japan a couple of times with my teachers, and looking at more Eastern philosophy in terms of whole body kind of thing. So the idea of yoga it wasn't so woo-woo California out there.
Yeah, I was going to say, because 1996, probably in, say, you take Eastern Europe. I remember where I'm originally from Hungary, and you say probably at mid-90s, late 90s, you say yoga to someone, you say, that's a hippie.
Yeah.
Okay, and there were not a lot of hippies at that time in that part of the world.
Exactly.
Now, again, this is not to say that California was full of hippies, but certainly California, I would assume, in general, the culture there would be more open to the idea
absolutely
of Eastern philosophy, Eastern practices and activities.
Yeah, and my feeling, I think I may have mentioned already, is that the doctor, I think he was looking, how can I mitigate my stress levels?
So it was a stress that he would.
Well, stress can be a very dangerous thing if we don't keep it in control.
Yeah.
And stress can sometimes, trigger reactions, immune reactions. And if we're looking at an autoimmune condition, this is my understanding years later, if it triggers an autoimmune event, is how do we respond to that? And so if we can keep our stress levels to a minimum, keep the mind in a quieter state, keep the body in a physically active, dynamic state, that maybe this will help in terms of the long term, in terms of a physical discipline, as opposed to going to the gym and pumping iron, and I was at that point spinning, if you know what spinning is,
Yeah.
the bicycles.
Yeah.
So I was doing that a lot to keep myself in shape and
So very active and more
very active.
stimulating ways of body practices instead of a very different approach with yoga.
So with the yoga, so getting back to what Iyengar yoga is, so they recommended this because in the Iyengar tradition, Mr. Iyengar, BKS Iyengar, who has been not only my teacher but also Shai's teacher, he was the gentleman who really started to introduce props, the use of props in yoga, so to help support the practitioner, not only support the practitioner, but also enhance their yoga practice to bring health physically, physiologically, into the pose with, I think, a very underlying principle, the universal ideas of alignment, aligning the body in such a fashion, in such an iconic way, in these, iconic postures, to create favorable, as opposed to reactions, responses. So the body can respond, and the nerves can hopefully make their connections from the peripheral body, the outer body, towards the more inner body, the motor nerves, to hopefully help with recovery of movement, functionality, and at the same time keeping the mind quiet so we're not going into an alarmist state.
So to some degree helping the body be more harmonious in its way of functioning so it can heal itself better.
Given the body the opportunity to heal itself.
Why would you say the opportunity? So because of stress and other factors, so the body would want to do that, but it can't. Is it an oversimplification, or the concept is along those lines of allowing it to actually do what it would naturally be able and be wanting to do?
I think that's part of it. Certainly think that's part of it. And I think yoga is a broad spectrum of what yoga encompasses. And so if we look at yoga as a physical exercise solely, and that's, from my mind, that's where I was kind of coming from.
Yeah.
But the scope of yoga incorporates not only the physical body, the emotional body, psychological body, our intelligence, our ego, all our aversions, what we like, what we don't like to do. And certainly, I think the ego can play a very... we all have an ego. And I think the ego can sometimes get in our way.
How would you define ego?
That sense of I. And I see this a lot, not only in myself, and when I first started, it's like, do you have any idea who I am? I am like a young guy. I'm strong. I'm going to beat this condition. I don't need to take a prop. I don't need to do that because I can do this. I'm strong enough. But then once I kind of got over that mindset, and said, it's okay, maybe I do need to take some help. Sometimes I think that's a very hard thing for many of us, especially in our culture. Male mindset is like, okay, I'm a tough guy. I'm going to get through this. Maybe you wouldn't articulate it that way.
I want to come back to this in a moment, but just to kind of place you in the timeline.
Sure.
So how long after all of that conversation happened in the hospital and the doctor suggested, did you actually go to India and first find this particular teacher? If I say guru, is that
absolutely
the right word?
Absolutely.
But that's okay. Okay,
yeah.
Because the word guru has been so overused and vulgarized, right? Like
absolutely.
In the sense that everyone is a guru who knows a thing or two. But
what guru, my understanding, translates as is the one who brings you from darkness into light. So that can be
teacher
again,
in the most spiritual sense.
Absolutely.
Who helps you through a path.
Move beyond. So it's a whole body endeavor as opposed to just the physical body.
Yeah.
Where I was coming from was the physical body.
I was just wondering how much time passed before you actually realize you want to take it so seriously that you want to even go to the origins. I mean, the best place to learn this, which is India, and find this particular guru.
So I'm in the hospital. Friends recommended Iyengar yoga. So I was released from the hospital on Saturday. Don't remember what that date was now off the top of my head. But I found out there's an Iyengar Yoga Institute in Los Angeles, as there are many Iyengar Yoga schools and institutes worldwide, globally. So I went to it was a holiday weekend, that weekend in California, Los Angeles, USA, and Memorial Day weekend, a weekend to remember. And so I ended up going to the institute, the Iyengar Yoga Institute in Los Angeles, the following Tuesday. So within basically 72 hours of being released from the hospital, it's like, okay, let me find out what this is. I'm going to take action on this. So from there, I stumbled in literally with the help of a friend, hard to still lift my legs. I was feeling better getting out of the hospital. So I was welcomed into the class, and my teacher said, okay, there's no guarantee with this, which I thought was very honest, because there's no cure for what MS is. But if there's a way that I can start to work in such a way to get my functionality back, feeling back in my body, and as I was diagnosed with what's known as relapsing and remitting, if I can get this thing into remission and keep it in remission, that would be great. And if yoga is that physical discipline that can help me in that way, great. So I continued with the classes. I was starting to feel better and better by going. I started going a couple of days a week. Then I was like, but I'm really feeling having that control over my body again. And within a few weeks, I was still coming off the medication from the hospital.
That was your decision, or the doctor?
Just a protocol, because when you're on a steroidal, high doses of steroids, you don't just come off, clinically. So I was tapering off the medication. I was feeling good by tapering off the medication. I started to explore what these new medications were. And, having a little bit of reasonable intelligence, I said, well, I don't know what the long-term effects of these meds are going to be, because they are modulating your immune system. As I continued to discover what yoga offered, my understanding was that this can help balance our immune system, autoimmune responses. I was feeling better. Bottom line, for me, my body's feeling better. I'm starting to use my legs again in a way that I wasn't before. I was getting feeling back in my fingers, my hands. So things were working. So I was feeling good about it.
And in this particular school of yoga or branch of yoga, what is unique aside from using props? So why would this particular way of practicing yoga be so healing and helpful for that particular condition, or presumably for many others, so neurological or other, that other types of yoga may not be able to do?
For me personally, what my doctor recommended, because that's all I had to go on initially, and then started to look into the books, was he cautioned with the swimming to keep the body cool. Now, this isn't necessarily for everybody. So what MS is, when the immune system attacks the protective coating on the nerves in the central nervous system, then it leaves a scarring or a hardening, where it kind of makes the attack. And so that scarring or hardening, my understanding, I don't speak Greek, but the Greek word for that is sclerosis. So when you have more than one sclerosis on the nerves in the central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, optic nerves of the eyes, then you have multiple sclerosis. So if you're in a heated situation, and that's in more popular yogas now, you may be doing things like jumpings, jumping back and forth, or some disciplines, they heat the room to very high temperature. So for me, my specific condition is I have these sclerosis on my spinal cord. So in the heat, the body expands. So if there's an active sclerosis, if there's an active, hardening scar, then it makes it can make, which it did for me, symptoms worse.
Yeah.
Worsen the symptoms. So, and in the Iyengar tradition, and it's not to say that it's without jumping or anything like that. Yes, that's certainly part of all of it, but we don't necessarily have to do that. But it was I was working in such a way that I was getting the movement of the body with the support of the props, aligning the body under the teacher's eye as best as possible, and I was feeling the results quite significantly, quite quickly. So it was super helpful. It's not going to take the condition away, but it will, or it did for me certainly, and I think it does for many people that I've met. And it doesn't have to be a neurological condition, but it can also be a wide range, a huge scope of conditions that can be addressed through the application of Iyengar yoga.
Can you name a few? What other conditions you've seen this helps?
Certainly people who may be going through cancer recovery, oncology, a lot of breast cancer, cervical cancer, for the ladies, prostate cancer for the gents, musculoskeletal issues, knee problems, shoulder problems, head, neck problems, more organic problems like diabetes, heart conditions, to help support the organic body, sort of functioning of the heart, the circulatory system. It addresses basically all the systems of the body, but when we shine the lens on different areas, how similar asanas or poses and pranayamas or breathing techniques can have a profound positive effect. In my condition was mostly the nervous system, immune system, autoimmune responses, as opposed to reactions, which I think is an important thing, differentiation. And I've seen it certainly help with some of the other conditions I've already mentioned, musculoskeletal, organic, organs of the body, and also the psyche, the mind.
And how did you land in India with this particular teacher? Because it's one thing that you practice it for yourself and you're feeling better, but it's another thing that you take it many levels forward and eventually easing into becoming a professional yourself. So I guess that was a very long path of or journey of learning, and more than learning, perhaps it's also about you probably leaving your old life behind as you were transiting into this new area.
Absolutely.
So tell me more about that.
So when I was going to the Institute in Los Angeles, so one of my teachers at that point, she suggested, maybe you want to go to India and meet Mr. Iyengar, and it would be beneficial. And at that point, based on the condition of my life, you mentioned about transitioning. So at that point, I didn't have a job. I just was diagnosed with this new major life-changing event. I thought I wanted to be a little bit more stable before I traveled to the other side of the world, which was unknown to me. And I don't want to be stuck on the other side of the world in a position where I might be compromised. So let me just get on my feet physically, financially. So if we think of even the broader scope of what yoga is, mobility and stability. So I wanted to be stable before I became mobile. So at that point, I understood there was a waiting list before traveling to the Institute in Pune, India. There certainly was for someone unknown to the Iyengars there. So I thought, well, let me sign up for that now, and that way. So then it was a few years before I went to India to meet Mr. Iyengar. So that was the trajectory of that. I was able to get a job once again. I was, keep my health insurance. So I had health insurance, very important factor in the United States when you're dealing with, a major kind of life-altering, potentially disabling. Yes, it's listed as a disability. Mm-hmm. I thought, well, let me be stable before I do that. So eventually I went, and I was feeling quite strong by the time I got there. So that's
which year was this?
And I first was in India in 2000.
Okay, so roughly it was 4 years after
about 3.5. It was about 3.5 years, I would say, by the time I got there.
Yeah, and you went there with the intention of mastering the practice for yourself, or you already thought that if this has been so beneficial to me, perhaps I could take it a notch forward and learn it as a teacher.
Yeah, initially I wasn't driven to become a teacher necessarily, but I wanted to deepen my understanding of what the scope of what the subject was. The more I was practicing it, the more I was feeling, okay, I want to know more about what the subject is. It's not to discount the idea of actually teaching somebody, because as I'd shared with some of the teachers here this past weekend, I remember sitting in my apartment in Hollywood and having gone through, the grief, the despondency of transitioning from an old life. I hadn't quite let that go yet, but it was having such a profound positive effect. My feeling was like, if I can help anybody else deal with this and avoid that sense of hopelessness, not to offer false hope, but hopelessness, where it's just like, okay, I just want to give up, throw in the towel, give up. It's like, well, there's a way you can do this, or perhaps navigate some of these things and actually feel pretty good and feel good about life and hopefully get things in remission.
With MS, when somebody's diagnosed, and let's say a person doesn't know about any alternative way other than medication, which may work with severe side effects, presumably. So does it eventually, where does it lead? Is it the massively lowered life expectancy? Is it the quality of life really decreasing, or you might be wheelchair bound? Or so what is a more common scenario in this particular case?
So without now getting a little bit more into what the condition is, so there are essentially 4 stages of what multiple sclerosis is. So you can have a one-off kind of event where you present symptoms that are associated with what MS is, which is a range from some of the things that I've endured, as well as I lost my eyesight for a while, for about 11 weeks, because it affected the optic nerve. This was in the first 5 years, that's when I was having more exacerbations. And so you can have a one-off event. They do an MRI, maybe they find some sclerosis, and you never are bothered with it again.
Right.
Which is a great outcome. But most people are diagnosed with, like myself, between the ages, generally, the epidemiology is between the ages of 20 and 40 years of age. So it's the number one condition, my understanding, of the central nervous system that affects young adults. And so that's relapsing and remitting. Then, to further address what you're saying in terms of the evolution of what that condition can be, my feeling is without an intervention, be it either with medication or a complementary alternative, which is what I've explored, it can go into what's known as a secondary progressive stage. So that's where it's secondary. It's not what happens initially. You're initially diagnosed with relapsing remitting, and you can have relapses, like some of the things I'd mentioned already, but you never fully recover again. So it goes in a more neurodegenerative progressive state.
Right.
That's another stage of the condition. And another, the 4th basic major category, my understanding, based on, I'm not a doctor or a scientist in that respect, is what's known as primary progressive. So from the onset of the diagnosis, that particular patient, student, goes into a more progressive neurodegenerative state from the onset of diagnosis and doesn't really recover to get things back into a remission. So from my perspective of being diagnosed with relapsing and remitting, which in many ways was a blessing for me, is like, if I can keep this in remission, great, and not go into that more neurodegenerative state.
Yeah. Not make it get worse.
So, if I may,
yeah.
My agreement with my doctor, I wasn't sure about these meds. So I did them initially because I had no idea what it is. I'm practicing the yoga. I'm feeling good. I started on these, it was like a daily injection. And I hate needles. And I was like, I just don't want to inject myself every day with something that's going to be, I don't know what the long-term effect of this is going to be at this point. So I thought, let me see if I can manage this in a more natural way. So my agreement with my doctor, eventually we came to in about 2001, as I said, I really don't, if I'm in crisis, sure, let me take the meds. I'm responding well to those, and we'll see how we go with that. So I've had a couple of exacerbations from the initial onset of this condition, but I started doing yoga on the daily. And so that earlier intervention, I think, had a major, profound effect on my specific condition. So my agreement with my doctor is it's like, okay, not what I want to hear as a doctor from my patient, but I think is in any good healing dynamic is a collaboration between the patient and either the doctor and or therapist that you may be working with.
Yeah.
So we agreed that, okay, if you're not going to do the meds, that we'll do an MRI of your brain and spine every year. So we do.
Just to see how you're doing.
See what's going on. So we can see because we can't see what's going on inside, and maybe things are progressing and we don't know it's progressing until it's too late, and you've already slipped into that second stage.
So how did it evolve?
We started doing MRIs. My initial MRI as a baseline was 2001.
Yeah.
Once we had this agreement. And so my next one was 2005. So when we compared 2005 to 2001 with no intervention of medication, the lesions on my brain had reduced in number and size. This is a good thing.
So you not only it not only did not get worse, it actually even improved.
So then from 2005, I've done annual MRIs of my brain and spine. And so there was no change from 2005 until 2012, no change in the lesions. Lesions are still there. Scars are still there. It's not a cure for the condition. But then when and I was doing these MRIs, I would often do them in India because it's a little more affordable to do them in India, and same equipment as in the United States. And so then from 2012 to 2011, again, it showed a reduction in the number of lesions and the size of the lesions on my brain.
Wow.
So this is a good thing.
How can we say in a more generic way, so how unique was your case in your view? Because it sounds short of miraculous. Could you say, or have you met others, or have you been in touch with others who had similarly positive results? So are you a unique example of this, or there is more hope for others who could follow this path?
I wouldn't say I'm necessarily unique, but most of the people I work with don't necessarily do annual MRIs of their brain and spine in terms of monitoring the disease. There are other patients that I work with. When I say patients, I'm not a doctor. Students who are patients of their doctors who also have done MRIs with favorable results. Now, it can be anecdotal, so it's not in a double-blind study, in terms of that.
Right.
But
we're not making here these grandiose claims, but certainly the positive effect is hard to deny.
It's hard to deny. And generally across the board, and many people who come to these various workshops that I offer or classes that I offer, it's not going to take their condition away, but they ultimately feel better and they feel their quality of life, as we were talking about briefly earlier, has improved vastly. To be able to do things that otherwise, emotionally, psychologically, you're also dealing with that whole aspect of grief, mourning, depression. How can I pull myself out of that and be able to function as best as I possibly can?
I was going to ask you earlier, but since you mentioned it now, I'd like to hear just a little bit about how you processed all of that, because you mentioned grief, you mentioned depression. So obviously when you're presented with such a life-changing diagnosis, a whole spectrum of feelings wash you over in the immediate or right afterwards, but certainly the weeks and months afterwards. So how did you, if you're comfortable talking about this, but how did you process all of that emotional roller coaster that followed the diagnosis until you started to see some hope in the form of this particular practice?
I think within the first 6 months of the practice, I was already feeling better. That in and of itself was like a positive sign. There are various asanas or poses that one can do which can help affect our mood. So certain things like back bends, back extensions can help to elevate our spirits emotionally and psychologically. So my response to that was like, yes, of course, okay, maybe let things go that need to be let go of. Kind of when you clean house, it's like, okay, yes, I've been attached to that wonderful pair of shoes or that amazing, dinner jacket that I've been holding on to for years, but is that still part of me anymore? When I've discovered something new and exciting that's really elevating my spirits. And so it's actually that grief and depression started to naturally dissipate, I would say.
I'm guessing this was not immediate by any means. So probably there was a period of months, if not a year or two, while you were still on the medication. You weren't so much yet into discovering yoga and other ways of improving your health and spirits. So I guess the early stage must have been pretty devastating before you started to actually reconsider it and starting to see it in a very different way.
To feel better, yes. I mean, I would say about the first 6 months, and I was feeling better, and that's when I was like, okay, that's when I had that kind of revelation that I'm feeling really good I'm feeling good about my life. It's like, okay, it's not what I had anticipated.
It was a surprise to you.
Yeah, it's not as bad as I thought it was, and I've discovered a whole new, scope, a whole new horizon of possibility, and steeped with these yoga principles, which I started to explore. It's like, okay, well, there's something to this beyond just my physical therapy. There's something beyond this. I'm feeling good. I'm psychologically, I don't know if I can explain that any further than I feel good. I feel great. And I was motivated to keep going and keep trying. And if I can then, put those attachments to my former life a little bit aside for a while, it was okay. It was fine. So then I still said, okay, I'm feeling good. I'm going to start going back on auditions again. And I did, and I started, still exploring that creative side. I've written a one-person show about my journey, which I performed in 2018 up at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, about my journey of healing.
Is it online? Is it available?
I don't have it online. It was a live performance. And one reason why I'd taken it to Edinburgh specifically, if you know the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, Scotland has one of the highest rates per capita of MS in the world. And at that point, this was in 2018, which marked 100 years of the birth of Mr. Iyengar, who passed away in 2014. So it was a way to honor him, at the same time help educate others. At that point, I was teaching. I had already started teaching other people with MS, etc.
Yeah, so you blended your artistic
the creative
background,
side,
creative side, and your path.
Absolutely.
For your journey.
And hopefully, and maybe bring some awareness to. There is a University of Edinburgh has a clinic specific for MS that had been funded by J.K. Rowling.
The author.
The author, yeah. Her mother, from Harry Potter, yes. Her mother had died from complications of MS years ago, perhaps from this. So that was a motivation for me. How can we bring this potentially healing, complementary approach to a population where there's a lot of MS just in the society.
Yeah.
And so that was a motivation for me to do that.
No, it's pretty incredible. Again, the journey, because just to highlight a point that you mentioned, which I think is just really so deep, where you said it started with a physical improvement of physical therapy, and how over the years and as you got deeper and deeper into the practice, it became far more first emotional, but ultimately spiritual. And even when you talk about letting things go, that's really a very deep way of looking at life and the non-attachment and everything that goes with it. So you left that old life behind, but again, you never gave it up because it still went on in your artistic side. But the way you looked at it and the ego attachment you probably had to it at the time was completely reworked into, strange to say, a more healthy way of being.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you've articulated that quite well in terms of that, and because in yoga, one of the aspects of yoga, two tenets of yoga, not only Iyengar yoga, but that's my only really exposure in terms of the practice. I've tried other styles, but it didn't work for me. But what I was started to say about the tenets of yoga are practice and detachment. So the abhyasa and vairagya are the Sanskrit words where you adopt the practice, a daily practice, and from the effects of that practice, discovered a whole new opening, new horizons of what could be there emotionally, psychologically, physically, and at the same time not being attached to the results or not being attached to something. Because when we identify with our attachments, that's when I think we run into potential problems is not the right word, but obstacles. You know, if we can let things go and not get overly attached, that's when we find if we're overly attached to something, then we deal with disappointment, heartache, you know, or ecstasy and excitement. But how can we live in a more reasonably calm and balanced state, which ultimately, in my feeling, understanding, is going to keep your autoimmune responses in a more balanced and natural state. You know?
I have three words that come to mind, and I'm curious whether they relate to each other at all. But one is ego, attachment, and expectations. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, do you see any connection between these? Because I think to a large degree, expectations are an attachment. Where I expect you to behave in a certain way, I expect my life to turn out in a certain way, I expect any number of things. But again, it's an attachment, which is often not healthy because that sets the frame as to how I view my own life. And if I can let that go, I'd probably be 100x happier.
Absolutely. I think they're all, those three words are totally integrated. The ego, you know, being at the center for many of us. It's like, okay, this is me, but this is my life, and I'm identifying with this body, or I'm identifying with this idea, or I'm identifying with this expectation. And if I don't meet that expectation, I think that's certainly myself, that drive in Hollywood. How do I get ahead? How am I going to succeed? I think we're a lot motivated by success, for whatever that means to a person.
I was going to say whatever your definition
whatever that
is.
Of what success is, whether it's financial, whether it's status, whatever that may be. You know, for me, success for me, at this point, certainly one aspect of that is be able to live another day symptom-free with MS.
You're just balanced.
I try to find that balance. I mean, I hope I can. I mean, it's not without. You know, another tenet of yoga is, what is yoga? What is it? You know, yoga means several things. It's a union of perhaps body, mind, breath, body, mind, spirit. It is also identified in the yogic texts as the cessation of the fluctuations of consciousness. So those are big words, but our consciousness is also involved in our ego. So what is my perspective on the world? What is my perspective of myself? What are my expectations of myself? What am I attached to? I'm really attached to getting that new car, or I'm really attached to getting that new house, that new whatever it may be. And what am I doing? What am I putting for my expectations, my attachments? How am I living my life? That drive to get up every day and, you know, get ahead, get ahead, get ahead, get ahead. My perspective changed, so my goals changed, I guess, to a certain degree. So my goal is ultimately, if I want to keep my MS in remission and be perhaps an example to others and encourage others to have a feeling of this, then my goal and attachment, if you will, is how can I effectively transmit that information to somebody else, hopefully, that they have their own self-discovery.
Mm. And it's interesting you say self-discovery even more than improvement of their physical condition, because I think that's an even higher achievement to get to that stage, which you certainly come across as having gotten to that stage where you started at again, the very physical side of it, that you want to ease your condition, you're looking for an alternative way of handling it or managing it. But it actually took you much further than what you probably bargained for at the beginning or what you had expected at the beginning.
I had no idea the scope of what yoga was. I just heard it was good for me. My doctor said it was good for me. So yes, it was a physical way in, and which is the way for many people without judgment. It's like, yeah, I want to feel better. I want to feel good. And so another aspect, of course, is that self-transformation, that self-discovery, the discovery of the self, beyond the ego, beyond our attachments to our body. And that's what I was attached to, of course, is my body, to get better, to feel better. It's like, okay, but again, whether it's I don't know if it's a higher evolution, it's just an evolution. It's going through, peeling off those layers from the outer body, the more physical body, and then it happens naturally. My feeling is, if we are guided in such a way through the practice, that person that has that feeling, that bhavana, in the Sanskrit way of speaking, which encompasses our emotions, our psychological body, and it wasn't like it didn't happen overnight, but if I could let these things go. And it was really hard, I would have to say, as that younger guy, to get over that ego, to get over myself, to take the help, to take the suggestions of my teachers, to say, okay, this can actually really, once I kind of got over it and I took the help of the props and the support of the props and whatever, that to let that ego be quiet. Just let it be quiet.
Could we say that it is fear that's holding most people back from letting go of those attachments, or are there other explanations or factors at play?
I think fear is a huge part of it. There may be expectations. Now, I don't have a family. I don't have kids, and so that can be another motivating factor in order to continue to push, to get ahead, take care of other people.
Even that sort of push often comes from fear, because fear
Sure.
of what's going to happen to them, or what if. So fear is always the question of what if.
Yeah.
And it's this, well, more than fantasies, but often
It's very real.
Very real, imagined sometimes, but sometimes very practically real ideas of where a situation or a trend can lead to. So it is fear, but still, you still manage to let those expectations and those attachments go. So what's your take on that, or what's
If
your
we can,
advice?
What I started, I think, which was helpful, it was a nice portal, was when I started to face my fears in an asana class. Okay, the teacher's asking me to do this, to do something that I never thought I could do, because I'm
Like
afraid.
as a pose?
A physical activity. And if you can face that fear in a very studied and safe environment and overcome the fear, then I think that's another portal, another gateway into how can I translate that into something more tangible in my day-to-day life off the yoga mat? How can I deal with this diagnosis? How can I deal with this physical, mental condition that I'm dealing with?
Fear of death.
Fear of death.
Suffering.
That's a big, they're called the kleshas. That's one of the kleshas, which are the things that can hold us back in our practices, is fear of dying. So, okay, all right, but if I can get over that fear, if I, stand in the middle of the room and I start to drop backwards into a back arch, I'm going to die. If, this may be going through the mind. But once you do it, through the guidance of somebody helping you and encouraging, I'm not saying that would necessarily be the thing that we would go to in a more rehabilitative environment necessarily, but if I can face that fear in a yoga situation by the way it's been presented to me, then to me it unlocked that door that was blocked, to say, okay, well, let that go. And then I was able to start to let go. It's like, okay, you know what, Garth? I need to hold a handrail when I'm going down the stairs, I'm going to hold the handrail. So I have that mobility and stability. I don't care what anybody else thinks. Where I think, certainly coming from a Hollywood perspective, I was very concerned about approval, about success.
How you come across?
Yeah, how I'm being monitored, somebody else's idea of who I am. And starting to let those ideas go, I think, was very helpful for me mentally and psychologically.
This is super interesting, and I appreciate you putting things in such an interesting perspective. And I'm wondering, where is that spectrum between audacity and recklessness? Because when you say let go of your fears, fears often serve a very practical purpose. You are not blindly running into the wall because the fear has taught you that it probably is not going to end up well. But often it's very limiting and it's holding you back. So where is this? Where is it? Where is courage and where is stupidity?
Funny you bring up the word courage. So when I met Mr. Iyengar initially, and this is not just 2000,
right?
Okay, when I first met Shai. When I met Mr. Iyengar, we were talking, having a conversation, and one of the things that he said to me, which he says not just to me but to others, but it resonated with me strongly, is every day you must walk that fine line between courage and caution. So to be brave enough, to be courageous, to move forward, but cautious enough to respect what's going on in the body. So I think that intersection is where intelligence comes into play. So we can, once we're informed by what are the potential hazards that I'm facing, what's the potential, so it's not recklessly going into something, but if I prepared the body in such a way, I prepared the mind in such a way, that's why, there are certain levels in the Iyengar tradition, from a beginning level. So there's a natural progression to a more intermediate practice, to a more advanced practice. So you're not having a beginner come off the street and recklessly having them do something that is just way out of whack. That would put them in harm's way. Safety first. So again, that's where the intelligence, I think, and reasonable discriminative intelligence. So that and I think from that springboard of discriminative intelligence is then we can be judicious in our practices.
I think this is applicable for every walk of life. You cannot be so reckless, like we said, that you you do need to take risk. There's no doubt about it, because otherwise you're very static. You're not growing if you're not taking that leap. But how big that leap is where I appreciate you bringing up intelligence and perhaps also maturity, that you have understood where that fine line is between going too far and endangering your physical being or your financial health or any other, and at the same time still pushing those limits, those boundaries
without expectations.
In a smart way. Okay, without expectations. So how then what motivates you then? So what is, if you don't have expectations, what pushes you forward?
Or perhaps maybe not being attached to the expectations. I would say, another aspect of yoga is memory. I mean, we've all been to school, correct? I think most of us have been educated, been to school. So when we are first learning, we're learning the ABCs, the 1, 2, 3s, our times tables, our alphabet, how to speak, but if we get really kind of stuck there and we don't go beyond learning those rudimentary things, then we're stuck there. So, but once we learn and we can have some memory to inform how we begin our educative process, if you will, that we can then move beyond whatever limitation might be there. Like now I want to go to university. What's motivating me to go to university? Is it for higher education? Is it a job? Is it getting a good job, or whatever that motivation may be? So then there is that some sort of an expectation is in play. I know it's a little bit like maybe it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth at the same time.
No, what I'm thinking, what I thought of as you're explaining this is an idea when the motivation comes from inside. So the intrinsic motivation of curiosity, of self-betterment in every sense, versus the expectation to say, well, I go to college because I want to end up working in whatever startup or Hollywood or any other place, or here in Brussels, maybe EU institutions. That's outward looking and future looking, something connected to what I'm doing now. So there's a very clear calculation, as opposed to saying, I'm going to learn this for my own sake. I'm going to learn it because I'm genuinely curious, and I'm going to learn it because I feel better as a result. So the expectation is not some future reward conditional on so many external factors, but it's an intrinsic value on its own. Like, I'm reading a book not because I have to or I'm expecting to use it in the future. Perhaps I will, but I'm reading it because it gives me
some pleasure,
or intellectually I'm stimulated, and that's a good thing in and by itself.
Absolutely. And I think, talking a little bit about the memory, what I was saying is how in the Yoga Sutras, the philosophy, that eventually memory fades and becomes part of our intelligence. So we're using those ABCs, those 1, 2, 3s, that it becomes part of our intelligence. And as
it's integrated.
It's integrated, and as the intelligence continues to evolve, then it's like every experience adds to our memory, I think, either in a positive or a negative way. So if we can, really glean those parts of us that can continue in that, having that memory, okay, I've had some transformation here already. If I continue on this path, maybe let's see what goes. There's that curiosity. Proceed, which I still listen to those on the daily, with courage and caution. Be courageous enough to take the action, cautious enough to respect what's going on in my body and not put myself in harm's way, but continue to explore. Because I know from my memory, when I've explored and I've taken that next step, something positive can happen. But not being necessarily attached to that result, that it's going to happen.
Right.
So you're doing the work, and I think that's...
Because if it doesn't happen, it's still okay.
It's still okay. Nothing bad happens. When we face fear, just talking about fear, it prompted another, I don't remember who it was I was talking about a long time ago. It could have been in the acting community. But a lot of times, when we're facing something that is fearful to us, it can arrest us. And we can either, if we look at something that's fearful for us, it can keep us at that level, and we have choices, intelligent choices there, I think. And the choice to walk away, not, even face that fear, okay, valid, but nothing happens. But if we can explore perhaps what that fear is, and if I can take a step intelligently, safely, to go to that next level, then it can potentially open up a huge realm of something new, a new level of understanding, a new evolvement on that step towards self-transformation, self-discovery. Because ultimately, the ultimate goal, I think, of yoga is freedom. That's my understanding. And so we're released from the bondages of our mind, of our body. So if we can find a way to do that, and yes, obviously, when we're dealing with a medical condition, that's going to be probably our primary focus, our primary goal. How do I get myself released from this bondage, and release of living, and beyond the grief, beyond the despondency, beyond all of it, and how can I effectively move forward to kind of perhaps chat about what we mentioned a little bit earlier on, is that I know over the course of this last weekend, several people that I'd seen, one actually last weekend in the UK, and one gentleman here actually when I was teaching in Ghent, and they both have progressive multiple sclerosis. So they're not ever going to get rid of their multiple sclerosis, but both of them, from doing something dynamic, things they thought they might never do physically, through the placement of a prop or the encouragement of the teacher to safely move beyond, ultimately then they walk away feeling, I feel so much better. They don't know why they feel better, but physically I just feel so much better, and spontaneously smiling, they're happier, they walk, they can walk out. Sometimes I've seen people walk out, walk in with a cane because they're dependent upon them, because that's what I need. And then they do a yoga class, and this happened certainly in South America. I remember one lady specifically, very attached, a little bit older, and comes to the end of the class and she forgot her cane. She's walking out, she's feeling good. She's like, I feel great. Now that may not last forever. You may not have realistic understanding and a realistic expectation. So back to those expectations again. To be realistic. I'm not going to cure the maybe condition overnight, but if we can work together, you and I as the student, the teacher, the whatever you want to call that relationship, informed by, certainly when we look at it under the scope of what we're doing here in Brussels with Anu Yoga in the hospitals, informed by the clinical intervention of the doctors, and how do we all work together as a team for, ones to meet those goals of what you want to do. I want to be able to go, one of my students, I'm just shifting my mid-thought, one of my students in Los Angeles who has Parkinson's disease, and she's been very affected by Parkinson's disease. When I met her, one of her goals was, I want to be able to stand up straight and smile at my son's wedding. So now that next stage of that is now what she wants to do is like, I want to be able to hold my grandbaby and not be in such a state of tremor and weakness. So these are the things that we're working towards together. And I'm in contact with her neurologist so that we know what she's dealing with, what kind of medication she's on, how are we integrating this and doing the yoga practice so she's more stable to be able to stand up, not fall over. So her son, who she stood up and smiled and at the wedding for the pictures, is now holding the grandbaby without fear of dropping the grandbaby because of her condition.
Yeah. And I just want to highlight that point where her desire is aspirational. It's an ambition. It's not an expectation, it seems. She's not going to say, I'm going to do this because I expect I'll be able to do that. No,
Correct.
I'm motivated to do that, and that's my aspiration I want to work towards. And it's probably a much better way of looking at it than having a rigid expectation. And another point I wanted to highlight in that context is the importance of trust as a belief in the unknown.
Exactly.
Where trust in this approach, this method, this yoga practice, effectively helping you because you trusted your doctor, so you took the first step on what proved to be a marathon or 1,000-mile journey. Also trust perhaps here in hospitals that you are talking to doctors and physiotherapists and others who they trust you, who trust the method, who trust Shai, and that this particular approach is worth investing into time-wise
and investigating
in that
as well.
sense. Yeah, not in financial sense, but in the sense that this is a method that has proven itself to work.
Absolutely. In this conversation, what you were just mentioning, I remember one of my teachers who was Mr. Iyengar's daughter. Her name was Gita Iyengar. And when we're looking at things like this, like the unknown, it's an unknown. It's like, wait a minute, this yoga, I'm not quite sure about this yoga. What's it going to do? So it's good to have, and I remember her saying, it's good to have doubt. It's, doubt, that's part of our intelligence. It's like I'm having this, I'm kind of assessing this, and it's like, I remember, not like, it is what she said, is it's good to have doubt. If you have positive doubt that maybe this could work, there's a chance.
So caution, right? Positive doubt is probably caution.
Positive doubt. If you have negative doubt, this is not going to work. There's no faith in the idea at all. So we're talking about faith. If there's not negative doubt, then it's not going to work. if you walk into a situation saying, that's not going to work for me, that's not going to work, then you've closed the door. You've closed that door to potential opportunity, to potential healing. But if you walk in the door and it's like, okay, well, I don't really know that much about yoga. I don't know what it is necessarily, but let me give it a go. And for me, to bolster my positive doubt was my doctor's recommendation, because he had practiced yoga. That was my initial diagnosing doctor. He had practiced yoga. He was swimming, so he knew the effect of what this physical dynamic was, how it felt physically on the body. So he was able to, I think, have an understanding of what I was going through, and to be able to recommend that with certainty, a certain amount of certainty, which to me had bolstered my faith in this can have maybe it's going to have a positive effect. I've got my doctor's approval on it, my doctor's recommendation. So to me, as an unknown person, never done yoga before, if my doctor is saying, okay, there's something to this, have a look into it, maybe it'll help. Plus, of course, he was also saying do all the medication as well. And then I eventually, changed that equation a little bit, and with the results that I've had. So that doubt, that positive doubt, it gave me that push is not the right
Nudge.
word, but
Nudge,
the
no?
encouragement
Encouragement, yeah.
to look into it, And I think that something that part of our conversation here today, another one of the Iyengar teachers who's alive, and he's Mr. Iyengar's son, and and maybe it helps in terms of the approach, is he's quite a philosopher in many ways, but the idea of a purpose, a process, and a consequence.
Purpose,
process and consequence.
Okay.
So what is our purpose for doing something? What is our goal? What is our motivation to do something? What is the process that we go through? And then being able to, intelligently, reasonably, using our discriminative intelligence, what is the consequence of our actions? And I think that can be applied in many things, but certainly when we're looking at it under the lens of a potential healing trajectory, is what is the purpose? Just as a little guideline, a little track, what is the process that we go through, and what is the consequence? And we may need to change and alter that process along the way. The initial step is like, okay, this can be helpful, but maybe we need to adjust it a little bit. What I was telling some of the teachers, or sharing with the teachers yesterday, was that when we look at yoga as therapy, so basically if we have an understanding of what yoga is, yoga asanas, and that's what many people understand yoga to be, is the asanas, which is fine.
The poses.
The poses, is how can we adopt what may be beneficial for somebody, for a heart problem, let's say, or unable to lift the leg, or they've broken an arm, or they've cranked their neck. But I know from my yoga practice, whenever I practice that pose or these series of poses and the sequence of these poses, my neck feels better, or my whatever it is, my lower back pain's gone away. It's gone. My knee problem is like feeling better. So how do I adopt those poses and adapt them according to that particular individual? So that's where I think that's kind of a bridge from yoga to yoga therapy.
Right.
Because you were
To
asking
me,
about
it's perhaps more than a bridge, but more of a three-dimensional, more of a spiral. Because as you certainly start practicing it, the purpose gets rewritten. It's reevaluated, because you started with a purpose of, hey, let me look for more natural ways of dealing with my condition, but it kind of got rewritten to say, well, this helps me in a psychological sense in so many ways, and I'm less attached to my past life or the way I used to be. So it's rewritten as you keep doing it in a circular manner. And I think the purpose to me is fundamental, because certainly many patients, especially if you work with hospitals, may be skeptical, and the last thing they ever thought about was doing yoga. And here they are, diagnosed with a condition, or maybe after an accident or any other mishap. And they say, well, okay, should I do this? What's my purpose?
Sure.
My sole purpose is
I want to get better.
choose to get better. Exactly. Because if you tell them, listen, this is going to open you up in a spiritual way, and you will let go of your attachment, it's like, oh, come on.
They'll
Okay.
be like, yeah.
Okay, let's just move on. Give me that pill and let's forget each other.
Sure. I mean, this is an observation that the Western medicine is motivated for a quick fix. It's motivated by a...
Let me add to that. It's very deeply tied to human nature, where patients also want a quick fix. Right?
Of course.
Like medicine
That's
as
our
well.
Exactly. That's our expectation. I want a quick fix. Give me the doctor, give me the pill. Let me move on with my life. Let me get back to the perhaps folly that got me into this place in the first place. I just want to get back to my old life.
Yeah.
But what you're saying about that integrated spiraling process, your goals change. The purpose changes. Your perhaps attachments. Naturally, you're not saying, okay, I'm looking at this, I'm going to let go of these attachments now. It doesn't happen. It's a natural evolution.
Yeah. You can't set the bar too high too early, because that healthy caution immediately gets converted into a high amount of fear, and it becomes debilitating.
Mm-hmm. I've had students, certainly in different places, come in, do one class and say, well, we're expecting unrealistic results from doing one class. It's like, okay, well, what can I say? I mean, I'm here to present this. If you want to continue with it, it does require a little bit of, consistency. Like with anything, the more
only charlatans are cocksure. They are the ones who promise you everything 100% quick fixes. Mm-hmm. So it's a good thing that you are not setting that expectation.
in
that sense.
And I think from the patient, student, client, whatever you want to say's point of view, is to have that realistic expectation. And if you can encourage, that there's a feeling, okay, I walk out of the class, like I was saying earlier, I feel good at the end of the practice. It's that motivation that it's like, okay, that's what the natural progression of like, okay, if I continue this, perhaps having that faith to continue to do again and again and again, it may have a continued positive effect. And sometimes that positive effect may come more so from the patient's caregiver, the husband, the wife, the nurse, the caregiver, than the patient themselves. Because sometimes
they notice, hey, you're just a better person, or easier to be with you.
Easier to be with you. You're able to go to the toilet by yourself. I don't have to be with you when you go to the toilet. Getting in and out of the car, transferring from the car. Those of us who may have a difficulty using the legs, and notice that you're able to turn better, you're able to lift your legs a little bit better, and the caregiver's life gets easier. Even though the person going through it, they recognize there's been a transformation, but maybe not the degree of that transformation immediately, because it's just naturally progressing. But the observer from the outside, whose life you may be impacting also, then that's what I've gotten feedback from husbands, caregivers, wives, friends, that they're seeing that person is actually having a better quality of life. They're able to reach that plate from the cupboard without me having to go there and reach the plate for them. Simple things, occupational things. Being able to put the food into the oven or the microwave, and maybe it was up here, and I can't extend my arm because I've got a shoulder restriction, or there's a tremor with the arm, and I'm going to drop the plate, or whatever it may be. These are just some real-life examples that I've received feedback on from the caregiver or from the patient themselves. How these small things, it may seem small to those of us who've not ever had to deal with those kind of restrictions, but can be a huge, monumental change that either the person themselves recognizes or their caregiver may start to recognize.
So how do you work with with hospitals and healthcare facilities. I understand you're not only giving private classes and even on Zoom, which is pretty fascinating, but when you are here in Brussels because you're setting up programs, you're teaching and kind of train the trainers, I assume. So how do you work with these multipliers or other facilities to share the method?
I would certainly say that Shai Kaplan, who has developed Anu Yoga, which means we are yoga, and
our next guest.
Yeah,
as a side note, yes.
And Shai has made some great strides, and has been motivated to bring yoga to integrate it into hospitals. So she's been working diligently for years to do this, having recognized the efficacy of how Iyengar yoga can have on patients. So Shai has been kind of opening up that doorway and asked myself if I would be interested in bringing some of my experience to help with that and work with other teachers. Mm-hmm. We together had done a presentation in a hospital based on case studies that I have done, from my patients.
And you yourself, you're a walking
and
case
myself,
study.
and presented it to the doctors and clinicians in various hospitals in past. And so that's been a very, I think, powerful thing. Not saying that's not my ego talking, but I think I see the effect that it has on the clinicians. Like, this could be very beneficial for the patients. So it's exciting that the doctors have the positive doubt.
Yeah,
and
especially working in conjunction with you, so it's not either or, but really
that it's
as
a
team.
Multidisciplinary integration coming together. And I don't have a citation in front of me, but there was a study that was done on the efficacy of yoga, not just Iyengar yoga, but of yoga on various health conditions, and was proven, but I don't have those statistics in front of me. My understanding, it was proven that the earlier the intervention, which was my case, so being in hospital, so when the patient is diagnosed with something, or there's something there, or it's an intake, it's a traumatic whatever, and it's like, how can we, aside from the clinical patch up, whatever it may be, diagnose, then what is the next step? Physical therapy, but incorporating that yoga as soon as possible had the most efficacy on patient healing and rehabilitation. So I think that's an important thing to take into consideration. And the motivation for those of us who have been through these traumatic, life-changing events, for me, it was that early intervention. Within days of getting out of the hospital, I started.
That makes sense.
And that's when I look back that I say, this has had such a profound effect. So, which is similar to what the allopathic way is like, here's the medicine, take the medicine immediately, and hopefully we can, lessen the severity of your condition. But how can we do that also as a complementary approach as well?
And especially for conditions which are perhaps lifelong and they're not going to go away. So it's not like a one-off thing, but it's something that really changed your system. Mm-hmm. Now, before we wrap up, I have, maybe it can be a very large or very broad question, but I'm curious of how are you and who are you compared to 1996, compared to what you were when you were diagnosed?
How am I? To answer that first, I feel good. I'm strong. I feel strong enough, enough for an aging man. I'm a little bit older now. I'm in my 60s. So there's natural things that happen with age. But yeah, I feel strong. I feel good. I feel vibrant.
As also proven by the videos, which we're going to link. It's impressive the kind of poses you do.
So,
wow.
It's been part of my journey. And who am I? I would say, that brings up another aspect of yoga. I'm still the same person. There are two aspects of yoga. There's prakriti and purusha. Prakriti are being the elements of nature, which change in a constant state of flux, which are basically our emotion, our emotions, our mind, but that part of us that continues. It's like your native place. That's you. That's your inner self, whatever you want to call that. Universal spirit, without getting to whatever, soul, whatever that may be, that part of you that continues beyond the clothing of the body.
Your essence?
Yeah, you, that if you'll allow me to say, the witness that resides within, that's been there since childhood. That person is still there. That part remains the same, but the transformational part of the body has changed. The transformational understanding, the progression, discovery, a little bit further discovery of who I am and who that, maybe being able to have a little more calm, acceptance of that part of me that continues beyond the pulls and pushes of nature.
It's beautifully put. And before we have our card, I'd love to have you, not just explain, but highlight your work to our viewers, our listeners. You have a book, you have website, so please share that, and we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Sure. My website is yogarth.com. Just Y-O in front of my name, so it's a combination of yoga and Garth together, yogarth.com. In 2018, Gita Iyengar, who was Mr. Iyengar's daughter, she asked me if I would please write something to share with other teachers and practitioners. We know your practice here in Pune, and so I said, sure, I'll write something. And the next day, sadly, she left her embodiment. She died. And so I was motivated to write a book. So I've written a book. It's available worldwide, and it's available either through local organizations, local bookstores, or Amazon. I know whether you or not you are, go on Amazon, but it's available worldwide on Amazon.
What's the title?
It's called Yoga and Multiple Sclerosis, a practical guide for people with MS and yoga teachers.
It couldn't be more straightforward and descriptive.
It's basically
than
what
that.
it is.
So it's perfect. Okay.
And that's available on Amazon, as I said. Okay.
And also just to highlight, it's not only MS, as I understand, but a range of other conditions you mentioned.
Which brings up Anu Yoga, and the website for Anu Yoga is anuyoga.org.
So as a final 30-second ritual, please take a card.
Sorry, I need my glasses. What do you still want to do before you die? For me, continue to live every day to its fullest.
I think in the most plentiful and free way which you've learned how to do it.
I hope so.
And I really appreciate you sharing your story, your insights, and all of that. I really enjoyed all of that. So we'll do our best to spread it far and wide.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. It's been my great pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks again.